In January 1996, a murder occurred in a parking lot in the Adachi district of Tokyo, Japan. The person involved was named Etsuo Ono, a short man with thinning hair, a square face, and prominently protruding front teeth. The Japanese public was familiar with this name because 20 years earlier, a series of consecutive cases targeting young women had occurred in the Tokyo metropolitan area, and Ono had been convicted as the perpetrator. Then came a turning point. He was declared innocent, making him a wrongfully accused hero in the media's narrative. 20 years later, he became a suspect in another case. What connection did he have with these crimes? Let's explore this case with crime documentary files. On Tuesday, January 9th, 1996, on a day with a slight chill in the air, a strange object caught the attention of passers-by at an empty lot near the Higashi Rokugatsu parking area in Adachi district. It was a human-shaped package wrapped in an old, worn blanket. Upon closer inspection, the scene made people shudder with horror. Police forces quickly arrived at the scene after receiving the emergency call. Inside the blanket was the body of a man who had been burned, with the head severed. Investigators discovered the perpetrator's DNA left on the blanket. This brutal method of murder reminded people of a horrifying case that had shocked Japanese society 20 years earlier. The Tokyo metropolitan area had previously witnessed a series of 10 terrifying murders. The victims were all young women in their 20s who had been sexually assaulted and burned. The primary suspect was Ono, a man with a criminal record of theft and arson who had been spotted near the crime scenes multiple times. However, he was ultimately declared innocent. Now, with the new case at the parking lot, police quickly identified the victim, Ryoichi Miyauchi, 41, born in Iyama Town, Namegata District. After becoming unemployed, Miyauchi had left home, wandered to Adachi District in Tokyo, and often stayed at Toneri Park at night. Ono worked as a cleaner at Toneri Park, where the two met and later lived together. Ono's house was not far from the Higashi Rokugatsu parking lot. According to neighbors, several months earlier, they had seen Ono bringing a middle-aged man to his home. A few days before the body was discovered, many people heard violent arguments and fighting coming from the house. After that, no one saw the middle-aged man again. A few years earlier, Ono had served 2 years in prison for theft. After completing his sentence, he chose Adachi District as his place of residence. When searching Ono's home, police found blankets of the same type as the one used to wrap the body at the parking lot. Along with other evidence, Ono quickly became the prime suspect in the case. So what kind of person was Ono? And why was the Tokyo metropolitan area case related to him? Ono was born in 1936 in Kitawara Village, Namegata County, Ibaraki Prefecture. His mother was a farmer who became a widow just 5 days after her wedding and never remarried. She managed a small store and farm in the village while having 6 children with different men. Before Ono was born, his biological father had already passed away. He had 1 full sister, while the rest were half-siblings. Although his mother had a business and stable income, with the burden of raising 6 children, the family's living conditions remained quite difficult. Ono showed little interest in education, instead developing a habit of petty theft, frequently stealing items to exchange for money. During middle school, his academic performance deteriorated significantly. Except for physical education, where he scored 3 points, all other subjects only reached 2 points. While the school had 240 school days each year, Ono was absent for up to 60 days, skipping school once every 4 days on average. On days he didn't attend school, he helped with housework and took the opportunity to commit small thefts. Finally, he dropped out, returning home without completing middle school. Afterward, the entire family moved to Tokyo. There, Ono began looking for work to earn money. He once worked at a pinball shop, but only lasted a month before changing jobs. However, from then on, Ono became addicted to pinball, spending at least 3,000 yen each time he played and quickly running out of money. To finance his addiction, he began stealing in residential areas until he was caught and spent a year in a juvenile detention center. After completing his sentence, Ono didn't abandon his criminal path, continuing to commit small thefts. At age 26, he was sentenced to prison for breaking into people's homes. Despite multiple incarcerations, Ono showed no signs of reform and even expanded his crime portfolio to include arson. His life became a cycle, committing crimes, going to prison, being released, then re-offending, and so it went, with him being incarcerated every few months on average. Each time he was released, Ono would find temporary work to get by. As for housing, he had no fixed residence, frequently moving from one sibling's home to another. During his time in Tokyo, Ono was arrested a total of 14 times, accumulating 8 prior convictions with a combined prison time of nearly 13 years. He gradually became a familiar face in local police records. In 1968, when Ono turned 32, he was once again released after completing his sentence. However, just a few months after he left prison, a series of horrifying murders began in the Tokyo metropolitan area. One summer night that year, on a grassy area of the tennis court near Ayase Station in Adachi district, the body of a 26-year-old female employee was discovered in a tragic state. She had been murdered, sexually assaulted, and died from suffocation. Afterward, the perpetrator had set fire to the victim's body. On that fateful day, after work, the woman and her colleagues took the train and got off at Ayase Station around 9 p.m. That was the last time she was seen alive. When his daughter didn't return home all night, her father reported it to the police, only to receive the terrible news shortly after. A resident in the area reported seeing flames erupt at dawn. Clearly, the perpetrator had set the fire to destroy all evidence of the crime. Just 2 days after the crime, police received an anonymous tip. This person was convinced that the culprit was none other than Ono, who had just completed his prison sentence. With his extensive criminal record, Ono immediately became the focus of the investigation. A witness stated that in the early morning of the day the crime occurred, they had seen the victim at a small restaurant near the train station. Initially, the woman came alone, but not long after, a man appeared. The two chatted in what seemed like a friendly manner for a while, then left together. According to the witness's description, the man had a square face, dark skin, dry and messy hair, and wore a dark polo shirt. His physique was sturdy, like someone who regularly performed manual labor. All these characteristics matched Ono's appearance. However, due to the lack of direct evidence connecting Ono to the crime, this case was ultimately added to the list of unsolved cases. Also that year, Ono was sentenced to 4 years in prison for illegally breaking into people's homes. Notably, throughout his sentence, Tokyo didn't record any additional cases with similar methods. However, as soon as Ono completed his sentence and was released in 1972, the horrifying cases began to recur at an alarming rate. From 1973 to 1974, 3 areas, Tokyo, Saitama, and Chiba in the metropolitan region, consecutively witnessed 9 cases with the same criminal method. The victims were mostly young women. What made Ono the prime suspect was his continuous, coincidental appearances near crime scenes. Not only that, but Ono's blood type also matched the blood samples found at the crime scenes. In January 1973, a tragedy occurred at an apartment in Kita District, Tokyo. A 22-year-old office worker became a victim while sleeping. The killer snuck into her home in the night, committed the crime, then set fire to cover his tracks. Notably, no property was taken, leading police to conclude the perpetrator's motive was related to sexual assault. Just 2 days before the crime occurred, late at night, people had seen Ono lurking around the apartment area with a crowbar, behaving very suspiciously. However, since he hadn't committed any specific crime at that point, police had to release him after questioning. Just 1 month later, in February 1973, another fire broke out at an apartment in Yamanashi District, Tokyo. In the ruins, people discovered the bodies of a young man and an elderly woman. Although there was no direct evidence linking Ono to this case, and the gender and age of the victims differed from the previous pattern, the method of the crime had many similarities. This led police to suspect that both cases might have been committed by the same perpetrator. In the summer of 1974, the city of Matsuto in Chiba Prefecture witnessed 3 horrifying murders within just 1 month. Among the victims were a 30-year-old housewife and a young 19-year-old office worker named Sanai Koda, both of whom disappeared mysteriously. Koda had just graduated from high school that year and was working at a credit cooperative in Matsuto City. She lived in a company-provided apartment with two other female colleagues. On the fateful day, after work, Koda participated in a company-organized bowling event, then saw her friends home. At 9:40 p.m., she said goodbye to her group of friends and planned to return to the apartment, but she never arrived. Her roommate waited anxiously all night without seeing Koda return and finally decided to report the young woman's mysterious disappearance to the police. Not long after, tragedy struck again when a female teacher in the city was murdered in her own apartment, and the scene was set on fire to erase evidence. The victim lived in an apartment near JR Mabashi Station and taught at an elementary school in the area. The method was identical to previous cases. The perpetrator broke in through a window, committed sexual assault, then set a fire before escaping. Due to the limitations of investigative technology at that time, police could only determine that the perpetrator had blood type O. Some witnesses stated that before the crime occurred, they had spotted Ono appearing around the Mabashi area. Additionally, he also had blood type O, matching the blood sample found at the crime scene. With experience working in construction, Ono could easily use ladders to break into homes. Moreover, his residence in Adachi was adjacent to Matsuto City. What increased suspicion was that less than a month earlier, Ono had committed a series of thefts in the Mabashi area. He used ladders to break into apartments, stealing TVs, jewelry, and many other items with a total value of over 500,000 yen. Additionally, he also stole 29 books from a nearby bookstore, worth about 10,000 yen. A month after the female teacher's murder in Matsuto City, the body of office worker Sanai Koda was discovered buried in the ground at a construction site, decomposed to the point of being difficult to identify. Just 2 days later, the body of the missing housewife was also found at the same location. Police identified the victims through personal items such as wallets and monthly passes found nearby. Notably, the location where both victims' bodies were discovered, along with the apartment where the female teacher was murdered, were all within 500 meters of Mabashi Station. This further strengthened the hypothesis that all the cases were committed by the same perpetrator. The autopsy results showed that Sanai Koda had died from asphyxiation due to strangulation. She had numerous subcutaneous hemorrhages on her limbs and back, signs of a violent struggle before death. Forensic tests determined the perpetrator had blood type O. Particularly at the scene, police found a shoe print matching Ono's shoe size, another piece of circumstantial evidence linking him to the crime. In July, a fire broke out at a restaurant in Katsushika District, Tokyo, claiming the lives of two middle-aged women, the restaurant owner and an employee. Unlike previous cases, this time the scene showed signs of property theft. Just 10 days later, in Kusaya City, Saitama Prefecture, a 22-year-old female pharmacy employee became the next victim. The perpetrator had stolen a ladder nearby, climbed to the second floor to break into her apartment. Investigation results showed the perpetrator also had blood type O. A train station employee in the area stated they had seen a man who looked very similar to Ono appearing near the scene before the crime occurred. By August, the string of crimes continued when an office worker in Adachi District, Tokyo, met a similar tragedy. This time, tests showed the perpetrator had blood type O or B. Many witnesses described seeing a suspicious man fleeing the scene, about 5 feet 7 inches tall, wearing a white shirt, approximately 40 years old, all matching Ono's identifying characteristics. Not stopping there, just 3 days later, another female office worker in Ichihara City, Chiba Prefecture, also became a victim of the mysterious perpetrator. From 1968 to 1974, the Japanese metropolitan area witnessed more than a dozen murders with highly similar characteristics. This string of crimes reflected the alarming public security situation amid Japan's rapidly developing economy at that time. In reality, police had suspected and monitored Ono for a long time, but always lacked direct evidence to charge him. The shoe print found beside Koda's body could only prove Ono had been at the scene, but was insufficient to conclude he was the perpetrator. When the investigation reached an impasse, a month later, Ono was arrested for breaking and entering and theft in the Mabashi area. Police seized this opportunity to conduct an extensive interrogation. Under pressure, Ono finally admitted his crime. According to his confession, on the night of the incident, around 10:30 p.m., he spotted Koda on her way home near the construction site in Mabashi. Ono lured her to an apartment building under construction and sexually assaulted her. Initially, he intended to take her home afterward, but when Koda began screaming for help and tried to escape, Ono used the strap of the skirt she was wearing to strangle her to death. Afterward, he buried her body at a nearby construction site to dispose of it. Based on Ono's confession, police successively found an umbrella, wallet, clothes, and many other personal items of the victim carefully hidden under a levee near the scene. As soon as this information was revealed, media outlets unanimously reported on Ono as the main perpetrator of the horrifying series of murders, with articles describing him as a devil disguised in a simple appearance. Although the truth had not been fully clarified, in the public's perception, Ono had long been convicted. However, as the investigation deepened, a series of puzzling details emerged. Of the 10 cases believed to be related, at least 2 were identified as being committed by others. The case at the restaurant in Katsushika District in July was proven to be carried out by another perpetrator with financial motives, and this person had been arrested. Regarding the case in Ichihara City, Chiba Prefecture in August, although Ono admitted responsibility, the blood sample found at the scene belonged to type A or AB, while Ono had type O, a complete mismatch. Notably, the victim's boyfriend had a matching blood type and had met her the night before the crime occurred. These contradictions couldn't help but raise a major question. Was Ono truly the perpetrator of the entire horrifying series of murders in the metropolitan area, or just one of many killers operating during the same period? In March 1975, half a year after the crime occurred, Ono changed his previous attitude of confession, suddenly retracting his statement and asserting that he did not kill Koda. He stated that the police had used improper methods during the interrogation, forcing him to make a false confession. At that time, another case was also causing a stir, the famous Sayama case. The suspect, Kazuo Ishikawa, also frequently got into fights, had a bad criminal record, had admitted to the crime, then retracted his confession, declaring he had been tortured into confessing. Because Ishikawa was of Burakumin origin, this led to societal support. Ono and he were in identical situations, but reporters investigating discovered that police had confirmed Ono was not Burakumin from the start of the investigation, after which they had strongly begun to assume his guilt and adjusted their investigation strategy based on the suspect's identity, which also formed a bias, causing public doubt about the fairness of their investigative methods. For many reasons, the case was continuously postponed for trial, and Ono's trial was repeatedly delayed. In 1979, 5 years after his arrest, Ono published a book detailing his experiences, revealing his desire for happiness. He mentioned that he was very close to his siblings' children and yearned for a warm family himself. These sincere emotions touched the hearts of many readers. Some felt that Mr. Ono was a kind, loving, middle-aged man, and some began to believe he wasn't the type of person who would commit such brutal crimes. The Ono case quickly became the focus of attention across all levels of Japanese society. An organization called the Ono Relief Society was established, gathering people who believed in his innocence and were determined to defend him. They particularly pointed out that the blood type test results from the Koda crime scene might not be entirely reliable, as the scene had been burned, altering the samples. Even if the blood type matched, this was still only circumstantial evidence insufficient to convict. The most important evidence against Ono was his own confession, and the evidence that police had found based on those statements. However, these very pieces of evidence had many suspicious points that raised questions. After discovering the victim's body, police conducted an extremely thorough search throughout the entire surrounding area, but didn't recover any evidence. Yet, 100 days after the crime occurred, the victim's personal items were suddenly found exactly according to Ono's confession. Notably, the location where the umbrella was discovered was only 200 meters from the crime scene, and the place where the wallet was found was entirely within the area that police had meticulously combed in the first search. These items should have been discovered from the beginning, but that wasn't the case. More importantly, the police interrogation process revealed many suspicious irregularities. If it could be proven that Ono's confession was made under coercion, this would become a powerful counterattack, shaking the entire accusation of his crimes. Aware of this, the Ono Relief Society decided to focus on the issue of substitute prisons as a breakthrough, by questioning the authenticity of the confessions to conduct the defense. The so-called substitute prison refers to a unique criminal justice system in Japan. Under this system, before being formally prosecuted, suspects are not taken to dedicated prisons or regular detention centers, but instead are detained right in the temporary cells within police stations. These detention facilities are called substitute prisons. Since the police, who directly investigate the case, also preside over the interrogations, suspects often face much greater psychological and physical pressure, significantly increasing the likelihood of forced confessions and giving false confessions. In July 1986, the Koda case was finally brought to trial at the Matsudo District Court in Chiba Prefecture. Ono faced charges of murder. After 2 months of hearings and evidence review, the court concluded that the murder charge had been proven and sentenced Ono to life imprisonment. Not accepting this verdict, Ono immediately filed an appeal. Although he was only formally charged in one case, many media outlets continued to implicitly suggest he was the perpetrator behind the entire series of murders, while demanding he be held responsible for many other cases. In this situation, the Ono Relief Society launched a strong campaign against defamation, calling on all social classes to care about truth and justice. This campaign attracted widespread attention and became an important factor, creating considerable public pressure, helping to promote the judicial process in the subsequent appeal trial. 5 years later, in April 1991, the case was brought to trial at the Tokyo High Court. In the appeal trial, the prosecutor still maintained the position that Ono was guilty, based on his confession and the evidence obtained. In contrast, the defense strongly questioned the prosecution's interrogation methods, pointing out that after being arrested, Ono had been held in complete isolation in poor environmental conditions. Every day, he underwent high-intensity interrogations, with many signs suggesting he might have been tortured to force a confession. At this time, Japan had just experienced the burst and collapse of the bubble economy period, entering the phase known as the Lost Decade. Along with profound changes in social values, people increasingly demanded fairness and justice in the judicial system. Finally, the court acknowledged that due to signs of coercion from the police, the voluntariness and reliability of the confessions became questionable. The court ruled that Ono did not commit murder as initially charged, but still convicted him of theft and causing injury, sentencing him to 6 years in prison. Since Ono had already been detained for 17 years, not only did he not need to continue serving his sentence, but he also received compensation from the state amounting to 36.5 million yen. Ono's declaration of innocence reflected society's concern for legal justice at that time. After the verdict ended, Ono won the lawsuit, walked out of the courthouse, and waved to the crowd. The corner of his mouth turned up, revealing his 2 prominent front teeth, his face full of joy. Supporters erupted in thunderous applause and shouted to celebrate his victory. Facing interviews, Ono said that these were 17 very difficult years, and he was happy that people could know the truth. When he went to prison, he was still a young man. Now he was 54 years old, with thinning hair and in much poorer physical condition than before. When asked about his plans to return to society, he said the first thing he wanted to do was care for his bedridden mother, push her wheelchair, and he also expressed his intention to train again and work hard. The media outlets that had once considered him the main culprit also issued apologies one after another. Ono's life changed. He became a wrongfully accused hero under the pen of the media. He was invited to many places across the country to give speeches, sharing his story, encouraging victims of defamation to fight for legal justice. As he mentioned in the interview, Ono returned to the construction site, working in construction. He rented an apartment near his mother and sister's home in Adachi district, both working and helping care for his mother. He discovered that the foods he loved, like pork rice and ramen noodles, had all become more expensive. Of the initial compensation, half was used to pay lawyer fees, with the remaining 10 million yen managed by the Relief Society to serve as Ono's pension. The amount he could freely spend was about 8 million yen. However, he still lived an extravagant life, frequently visiting izakaya bars to have fun. He once proudly boasted to drinking buddies that he had earned a large sum of money from the state, enough to eat and drink for many years even without working. On one occasion, after getting drunk at an izakaya in Adachi district, he made a shocking statement. "I am the one who killed people but was still released innocent." However, people only regarded it as drunken talk, so no one believed it was true. Just 1 year after gaining freedom, Ono returned to his old criminal path. He smashed the glass door of a real estate company, was caught rummaging through property inside, and once again had to go to prison. After completing his sentence, he continued living in an apartment in Adachi district and found work as a janitor at Toneri Park. And then came 1996, the time of the story told at the beginning. At age 59, Ono once again became entangled in the legal system, becoming the focus of all suspicion. However, because he had once been considered a victim of a wrongful conviction, with support from many advocacy groups and an identity that had become special in public opinion, police this time didn't dare act hastily. They were forced to be cautious, only acting when they had authentic evidence, avoiding causing a wave of opposition from public opinion. In the early 90s, DNA technology was just beginning to be applied in criminal investigations. Compared to traditional blood type identification, hair identification, and other methods, the persuasiveness had increased significantly. However, at that time, the level of DNA technology was still not perfected, and its validity in court was still debated. Therefore, police were very cautious in the process of investigation and evidence collection. To obtain evidence, investigators disguised themselves as janitors, staking out the garbage dump near Ono's home, hoping to collect DNA information. One day, Ono disposed of garbage as usual, after which investigators took those garbage bags, containing plastic bottles, disposable chopsticks, tissues, and other items. They succeeded in extracting DNA from these, and through comparison, confirmed that it matched the DNA extracted from the blanket at the parking lot. Just as the investigation was progressing, another case occurred, and the arrow once again pointed toward Ono. One evening, residents discovered a 5-year-old girl lying unconscious in a park in Adachi district and immediately notified the police. Fortunately, the girl was taken to the hospital in time and escaped life-threatening danger. According to the account, that evening, the girl was playing with her older sister in the park when a strange man appeared and invited the two sisters to play. After a while, the older sister had to go home first. The man then told the little girl he would take her to a more fun place to play, then carried her by bicycle to another park, taking advantage of the darkness to commit violent acts. When the girl became frightened and cried, the man covered her mouth and tightly strangled her neck, causing her to lose consciousness before leaving. Fortunately, a passerby happened to discover her and quickly provided help. Notably, the location of the crime was just 100 meters from Ono's home. A witness testified they had seen Ono cycling with the little girl at the time of the incident. Both the victim and her older sister accurately confirmed that the perpetrator was none other than Ono. Faced with undeniable evidence, police proceeded to arrest Ono. In his initial statement, Ono denied intentionally harming the little girl. He justified that he only wanted her to be quiet, so he covered her mouth, and when he discovered she wasn't breathing, he hurriedly performed CPR and artificial respiration. Ono even claimed that he deliberately moved her to a crowded place so she would be easily discovered, while he himself hid nearby, only leaving after someone found the little girl. A few days later, police conducted a search of Ono's apartment. His living space appeared in an extremely dirty and chaotic state, with piles of sheet music, magazines, videotapes, and countless belongings stacked everywhere. But the most horrifying thing awaited them at the back. In the backyard area, investigators discovered a saw and a buried human head. Through forensic examination, the head was identified as belonging to Ryochi Miyauchi, the victim at the parking lot. The search continued and became even more frightening when in the refrigerator, police found other body parts of Miyauchi. The victim's ID card was also discovered in a drawer in the room. Facing a series of undeniable evidence, Ono finally admitted to his horrific crime. According to his confession, a few months before the crime occurred, while cleaning at Toneri Park, Ono had met Miyauchi, who was living as a vagrant and camping temporarily in the park. Miyauchi was born in Aso Town, Namagata County, Ibaraki Prefecture, 18 years younger than Ono. Before becoming homeless, Miyauchi had worked various jobs, from food store clerk to golf ball collector. After becoming unemployed, he began a wandering life. Ono always yearned to build a family home, so when he met Miyauchi, he decided to take in the homeless man, and the two began living together. In the early stage, Miyauchi proved very diligent, voluntarily taking on all household chores. Ono placed complete trust in his new friend, giving him the apartment keys, and daily provided 3,000 yen for Miyauchi to manage 3 meals. However, over time, the relationship began to crack. Miyauchi gradually became lazy, no longer wanting to prepare dinner, and frequently went out at night without notice. These changes caused the two to have intense arguments continuously. The day before the crime occurred, Miyauchi once again didn't cook dinner and didn't return home until 10:30 p.m. Ono, who had been restraining himself for so long, finally exploded in anger. The argument lasted until 2 a.m. During the dispute, Miyauchi suddenly declared he wanted to leave and demanded Ono pay 2 million yen as compensation for the household work he had done. Feeling betrayed and used, Ono suddenly realized that Miyauchi might have been living with him only for money. In an uncontrollable rage, he grabbed a baseball bat nearby and attacked Miyauchi. After the incident, he felt somewhat remorseful, thinking that he should at least return the ashes to the other person's hometown. Therefore, late the following night, he used a blanket to wrap Miyauchi's body and took it to the parking lot to burn. One day later, he returned to check, discovered the body had not been completely burned to ash, so he took the head back and buried it in his backyard. In 1998, the case was brought to trial at the Tokyo District Court. Defendant Etsuo Ono was charged with murder and other crimes. The court found the defendant lacked emotion, had an aggressive character, and a very high risk of reoffending. As requested by the prosecution, the court sentenced Ono to life imprisonment. The defense argued that the sentence was unreasonable, disagreed with the verdict, and appealed. A year later, the Tokyo High Court acknowledged that the victim's pain and fear were immeasurable. The nature of the crime was aimed at satisfaction or pleasure. After committing the crime in a fit of passion due to an argument, he had done certain things with the victim, hiding part in his home, possibly to satisfy some morbid pleasures. Finally, the Tokyo High Court upheld the original verdict. At this point, the case officially closed. Some people question whether Ono was the main perpetrator in the series of Tokyo metropolitan area cases. Unfortunately, those cases occurred before Japan's criminal law was amended in 2010 and had a 25-year statute of limitations for prosecution. The serial cases in the metropolitan area began in 1968 and ended in 1974. By 1996, when Ono was convicted again, all had exceeded this time frame. This means that even if decisive new evidence emerged, none of the old cases could be prosecuted, and that is today's case. What are your thoughts on this case? Please share in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next videos.